our next panel. I just have a few logistical announcements to make, and I just appreciate your cooperation for a few minutes. We need to get an approximate count of how many people will be coming this evening. If you're going to be coming this evening and you already have tickets, could you please stand up? I think I get the picture. Okay, so we are sold out, and you see, we maybe even be oversold out, so I appreciate you. To get bumped, you get a free flight. Another trip. Just a couple of more announcements. The hotel has asked us to please clear the room when the third panel is over. It'll be over a little bit after 6. We really appreciate your cooperation. We absolutely promise that the room will be cleared. They need to prepare it for the evening. And so if you can just clear them quickly as possible. If you're going to be meeting Todd McMaria up here, that's fine. But otherwise, this is a lovely area. The hotel has some incredible views. If you go down to College Avenue, there are fantastic restaurants. So come back in time to start at 8 o'clock.
Right.
The only other thing I wanted to say was I have a phone number now I want to pass on to you. If you want more information about where Ram Dass will be speaking for the SEVA Foundation, the phone number to call is 492-1829. And it's a very important foundation to support, so I hope that we will all get there. And now I'm turning the program back to Rick.
Well, one of the classic signs of a psychedelic experience, psychedelic mystical experience, is a sense of timelessness. So clearly that's what we're experiencing here today. I don't really need to introduce Tim to all of you, but I'd like to just tell you one thing that you probably don't know. I used to go to school in Florida, and it's a very conventional, conservative place by and large. And at the University of Tampa, University of South Florida, Tampa Medical School, they still use the textbook that Tim wrote that got him to Harvard, the Interpersonal Diagnosis of Personality. Yay! And also, I think that you're all familiar with Ram Dass and his various contributions. Robert Zanger has revitalized the network of psychedelic researchers and has founded with Oscar Janiger the Albert Hoffman Foundation, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. What they're trying to do is establish a world information center to gather together all the research that's been done over the past 30, 40 years in one place for the benefit of future researchers. And Robert was a therapist and still is a therapist, and hopefully one day will be able to be a full-time Albert Hoffman Foundation director and president. Now, Mark Kleiman is a professor of criminal justice at the Kennedy School of Government. He does, however, tell me that the shirt he's wearing is really his own. Mark has also been the Director of Planning for the Department of Justice, and is one of the people that I feel is most important for us to understand and talk with today, because he's got a very clear sense of what the priorities are, what the concerns are, how we're perceived in Washington, how we're perceived at the DEA. And I think that the mere fact that he's agreed to come today, I feel is a great step forward. And I'd like to thank him for being here. So today, this afternoon, what we're going to focus on is the challenges of research. What our history is, where we come from, what was done in the 60s, where the Harvard research began, what led out of that. Robert will talk to us about European research and what's happening in other cultures, other Western cultures, and then Mark will sort of synthesize and talk about how it's all seen by the government and suggestions for us if we would like to make progress with the government as opposed to against the government. So I'd like to open up this afternoon's program with Timothy Leary.
Tap when I have a minute left to organize everything. We just spoke of what aimed us kind of to consider where we've come from and where we're going, and certainly we must at this wonderful, wonderful moment. I mean, I'm so overwhelmed by what you have done, and so proud of all of us for being here. Many of our sisters and brothers who are not here with us, and I'd like to share with you our love for those who have been with us in this incredible adventure. Certainly Aldous Huxley, thank God, Bob Ramdas and Laura will update us on his wonderful, wonderful career as our coach at Harvard. It's all Alice's fault. And our dear brother Alan Watts, and of course we all wish that John Lilly were here. The man that was our partner in time when we started Harvard, Frank Barron, who sends his best wishes. Finally got to go on and on.
Abby Hoffman.
I was just about to say Abby Hoffman. Abby Hoffman, that's the next word I was going to say there. I was lucky enough, I don't call it lucky enough, but honored enough to be with Abby on the occasion of his last public speech. And I tell you, he went out with all of his firing every way. He went out really in a blaze of glory, publicly. I think Michael Horowitz, the archivist, and Cindy are here. I could go on. I had a long list of names, but you know what happens. You kind of, you kind of forget. To warn audiences, that my brain shows the effect of good use of the altitudes and velocities that I've navigated my brain through you. On the psychopharmaceutical side here, it's an old joke, but I'm not tell it again. There are three very serious side effects of psychotropic botanical products. The first is long-term memory gain. In 1 second, you can take it from the amoeba to Dan Quayle. If that's evolution. The second side effect of psychotropic vegetables is a short-term memory loss, and I forget the third. I'm giving tribute to, I think I gotta give tribute to John Lennon. And it's not just those of us that we have been honored to know, but my brothers and sisters I'm sure you're aware of the fact that we in this room belong to a long and honorable chain of visionary explorers and brain navigators and mystics who have gone as far within as they could. Just in this country, you know, this is the third psychedelic revolution that our country's been through. I must pay tribute to the people that we got to know by history at Harvard. The second psychedelic revolution took place, it started at Cambridge around the turn of the century. William James founded the first psychological laboratory in this country. He wrote that incredible book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. That was nitrous oxide, hashish, and opium. Oliver Wendell Holmes, you know. I think we must pay tribute to, as we always do, to the writers like Ginsberg and William Burroughs. But in the second revolution, Mark Twain was probably the most outspoken advocate of brain navigation. Indeed, he talked Ulysses S. Grant into getting a little neurological assistance. Grant, you know, was writing his autobiography, he needed money, and he had a terrible writer's block, so Mark Twain got a doctor to prescribe cocaine for him, and thus the world got Ulysses S. Grant autobiography. I know this is not the place where you're supposed to mention things like cocaine, so I won't. I'm not a great fan of cocaine. As William Burroughs said to me about a month ago, he said, I don't like any drug that makes me twitch. We had the first psychedelic revolution in this country, and again, started in Cambridge. The enemy of the second, we've got our war on drugs now. The enemy that William James and his crew faced was a women's Christian temperance union. And of course, the first revolution which took place in Cambridge, the enemy then was people like Cotton Mather and the Salem witchcraft trials, and then later came Ralph Waldo Emerson, who had very close touch. Michael Horowitz can give you the fingerprints and dates and all of this. He was very close touch with the psychedelic poets in England at the time. Margaret Fuller, probably the founder of women's liberation in this country. Hashish and opium. Michael and Cindy delighted me about a month ago when they quoted text lines of one of my great heroes, Thoreau, David Henry Thoreau. It's interesting, you know, he went to jail for passive, nonviolent resistance to the government of Washington, D.C. And by the time when Emerson came and said, what are you doing in there? And he says, what are you doing out there, Ralph? You know why he was in jail? I mean, this is talking about deja vu again. He was in jail for not paying a tax to have gone to support the Mexican War. So this long series of warfares, holy warfares of the industrial northerners against the vegetable growers of the South. I mean, Thoreau, by the way, it was ether. I'm not advocating. He's a great line about it. If you want to visit the stars, try ether. Could we be here, or would we be here in this moment of exaltation and sense of positive growth if we had not had in the last 6 months probably the 6 most glorious months in human history? We all feel it, and I know when you saw the video shots coming from Tiananmen Square, and you saw 100,000, 300,000, 1 million young Chinese students, and you saw that look in their eye, that Woodstock gleam, and you saw them with the headbands and the beat signs, and they had the old Abby Hoffman trick, they learned it for televisions, they knew how to play the cameras. They were throwing the flowers at the tanks and saying, soldiers, we love you. I mean, and then of course the Berlin Wall coming down. Ramdas and I had a wonderful Christmas phone call, and we both shared our joy that in a small way, and in a sense a larger way, everything we've been doing was part of the evolution of youth, the new breed that brought that wall down, because it was individual freedom. I personally would give giving out Academy Oscars for who brought the wall down. I would name 3 wonderful prophets of our time that influenced me and that I was fortunate enough to meet. The first of all, of course, was Benjamin Spock. Benjamin Spock taught quantum psychology. He said to the parents, treat your kids as individuals. I mean, that's the most powerful statement ever made, preparing us for the information age when you have to climb into your brain. There's only one person can run a brain, and that's the individual. The second person, who is not an American, is a Swiss gentleman, and also a doctor. Dr. Spock and Dr. Hoffman, I mean... He was one of the great organic chemists of our time. We all know that he was a very deeply cultured man with a deep roots in the tradition of German and Swiss and European mysticism, so that he just didn't happen to ride that funny bicycle home that day and think it was a psychiatric episode. He'd seen the guidebooks, he knew what was going on. Okay. There was a wonderful tribute for Albert, remember, in Hollywood, big St. James Club, and all these people were out there, all dressed up in Sunday night, and I was thinking, I said, Hoffman wrote a book called LSD, My Problem Child, and I said, Albert, they're your children. And third, who's the third person I'm going to mention? Third doctor, Marshall McLuhan. Because number one, Marshall McLuhan was always a strong supporter of the psychedelic movement in this country in the 60s. He actually told me, I get credit, it was his script by him. He told me the words that turn out, to be the American translation of Glasnow's Perestroika. He said, Timothy, tell him, turn on, tune in, and drop out. It's often is two in the moon. Okay.
There's a fourth person, too. What? Timothy, there's a fourth person.
Who's that?
Timothy Leary.
Oh, there's no news to you, there's a war on drugs out there. In the history of religious insanity and holy wars, I think this one takes the cake. I mean, the absolute... we knew at Harvard after about a year that we got into trouble with the taboo against the brain. You're not supposed to tamper with the brain in an industrial society, and we found that out right away. Many times after a while we'd sit around and we'd say, well, these psychedelic drugs are psychotomimetic. They create serious mental confusion, paranoia, hysterical hallucinations in deans and government officials who have not taken it. One thing is true, of course, in a war, there's no more, it's all propaganda. And the one weapon we have, and we're going to talk about what's going to happen. By the way, my script is very positive. Evolution did work for 2 billion years to create the human brain with its wonderful receptor sites. To let people like Czar Bennett and his ilk stop it all. Each of us in our own way have to follow Orwell's basic prescription. In times of big brother insanity, your first job is to remain sane yourself. Number 2, look around and you'll find there are a lot of people with twinkling eyes that are sane with you. But each of us has to do this in our own way. When Rick said to me he hoped I would give advice as to how we could get government permission do research on psychedelic drugs. I'm definitely beyond the government permission situation. Several hundred million East Europeans fought the government because the one. But also, one way I found is common sense. Common sense is so important. I'll give you 3 little common sense things you can do. I was on a radio program talking to in Mississippi, Alabama, and somebody talk about marijuana. They say marijuana kills, and I said, marijuana is really not very dangerous. It's the least dangerous thing around. And this old farm guy says, well, I'd like to talk to you, Dr. Leary. He said, you said marijuana is not dangerous. It seriously injured my son, Billy. Oh, gee, I'm sorry. What happened to Billy? Well, the damn fool went out of the barn and made a mistake, and half a ton of it landed on his arm. Every paper in the country, enormous big full page ad, all white space except a frying pan. And then the frying pan is a frying egg, and it says, this is your brain on drugs. So there's always a counterculture, there's always the underground. It happened in Soviet Union, it's happening here. I got on fax, I got about 5 copies of another advertisement. Same idea, white space. It's a plate now, and on this plate is a fried egg with 2 pieces of bacon and some toast. This is your brain with bacon and buttered toast. That's common sense. Because I'm not making fun of the drug crusaders, but I'm not compassionate. We've got to be tremendously empathetic and understand that the people who run the industrial age and run the machinery, they're in despair. It's all over. They know that that old thing is not going to work anymore. They're all out of jobs. I mean, for example, when the wall went down, there's no more evil empire to fight. I was debating with G. Gordon Liddy 2 nights ago in Chicago, and I said, Gordon, he's not changed at all. He's still talking about America's a little old lady in the streets with these big guns around. I said, Gordon, as your friend, I've got to intervene now. Take you to the Betty Ford clinic. Well, it's great, your gun habit. I mean, severe entity deprivation. I do feel sorry for millions of sincere people who, there's many reasons. There are many reasons why there's this war on drugs. One is because they have to have the Cromwellian Calvinist Protestants who run this country have to have someone to war on. And so they got the war on drugs. But deeper than that, there are profound religious issues here. As Terence McKenna has told us so many times, in the old days when it was all one and we were all pagans, the vegetables you'd be eating, cocoa leaves, and it was all part of nature, and there was you couldn't talk about the individual and individual brain because there's no individual and no brain. In the industrial age, as you well know, Richard, I can look back on it, you cannot allow people in an industrial, mass assembly, factory society to tamper with their brains. You simply can't allow it. This is why you have the robots. We're all here, the robot, you're a doctor and I'm a lawyer, you're a minister and you're a professor and you're a policeman and you're a criminal. Sorry, but we have you too. We've got our job. You can't have people tampering with their brains like robots suddenly poking around inside. So as we move to the information age, the communication age, the meaning of the information age is, of course, the discovery of the brain. So I would say year 2000, the 21st century would be the century of the brain. And I give credit to the great explorers of Magellan and Columbus and Huxley and well, interesting, Richard. Remember, Aldous Huxley used the metaphors of discovering and going across to the antipodes and like Australia and finding things and coming back. That whole, it's so, okay, I'll go one more minute here. The thing is that the brain has evolved over 2 billion years, and it's not our fault that the brain, DNA decided that the brain needs certain psychoactive or brain-activating plants and foods. I mean, there's been this wonderful symmetry and synergy between the plant kingdom and the queendom and the animal kingdom, to whatever you want to call it, that the brain needs these substances. I hate to break the news to Tsar Bennett, but you know, you've got the human brain definitely not on your side in this. What's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years, the advanced, underground, psychedelic counterculture of the computer software industry, many of whom are in this room right now, are producing something called artificial reality gear, virtual reality gear. I call it electronic software, WAR. These are suits. You climb into a computer, you know about it, you put your goggles on, but the goggles are screens, and then you produce any kind of, you create any reality you want. Should we meet for lunch? Should we meet in Taj Mahal? Do you want to meet in the ski slope of San Moritz? What do you got in your San Moritz file? No, how about try this thing? We're going to be living, inhabiting, traveling in artificial reality. The very concept, artificial reality. I mean, isn't that thrilling? A lot of people don't like the word artificial. A lot of people think that, a lot of people tell me drugs are artificial. You need marijuana, it's been around for 20,000 years, you call that artificial? All right, the artificial reality here is going to hook up with the psychedelic brain. Now, don't believe me. Believe the Wall Street Journal. February 2nd, look it up, Ruth. February 2nd, front page, Wall Street Journal, column 1, a big article about Jaron Lanier and virtual reality. And the headline said, electronic LSD, question mark. There's a picture of Jaron Lanier in his dreadlocks. And the sixth paragraph down the first page, it quotes me as saying, this is better than LSD, it's addictive, but it's legal. And the same week, I got the facts, Max, the same week, Forbes magazine, Forbes. Your father would be proud of me, yeah? Argo, the same stuff, these new simulated artificial reality is going to be more exciting, and it quotes me as saying again that it's better than LSD. These things, there's a genetic and historical thing going on here. There's not an accident that we started all this in the 60s when the baby boom, who would have been television people, you know, that. It's going to happen with or without us. I'll give you one tip, though. If you study the way the Republicans operate, when they start a war, they can't win. What they do is they get elected by saying we're going to fight that war. They get re-elected, as Nixon did, and we all knew after Nixon got re-elected, then they're going to end the war. Now, Bush was elected, you know, after all, he's not a wimp. Look what he did to Noriega. Bush was re-elected in 1992, and immediately he'll start making peace with us. Because, George Shultz said it, the war on drugs is not good for business. The question here is, What would I have done differently? Let me think about it. Thank you very much.
See, that's what moved into the office next door to me at Harvard. I mean, I was really trying to be what my mother wanted. But what chance did I have? Oh, it's a delight. And I really want to honor Timothy. Timothy was a person who took me out of a fate worse than death, which was being a successful citizen. And started me on a journey that I think is the richest possible journey I could have had in a lifetime. And I think that he was the first ray of light for me. I'm honored. I just want to add my voice by saying that this week in Congress, in the joint session of Congress, the new president of Czechoslovakia said, "Without a global revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better in the sphere of our being." And it was only a few months back that we saw the old Romanian president saying, "This will never happen here." And even now, I'm afraid President Bush and Mr. Sununu are trying to figure out how to contain the damage and potential chaos in which they lose their unstable king of the mountain position. But it is clear now that a historically irreversible process has started. And that's exactly what happened in the 60s. A historically irreversible process started. It didn't really start there, as Tim pointed out. It goes way back in all of human history. But something did happen in the 60s that was prepared for by doors of perception, that was prepared for by the beats in the 50s. Something happened that was of no less moment than what has just happened in Eastern Europe and Tiananmen Square and so on. And we are all now cleaning up after it, not in a negative sense, but figuring out what to do with the fact that it happened. And we can hardly understand the implications of what it means in our lives. And we are sitting here often feeling like we are the downtrodden. And it's quite the reverse. We have figured out how it happened. And now, as people on the platform have said in the earlier panel, now it's up to each individual, one of us. The way Gandhi said, "My life is my message." Now the way each of us lives makes a statement that it did work, that it did happen. I can't really any longer be frightened of the dragons of government. I can't really, because I see how ephemeral and how paper tigerish they are. And I feel the fear in the culture. And I feel that what's required of us is interesting. I find myself in a funny position today because I'm caught between Rick's desire for us to put forward a good face to be responsible researchers, to play a part in the game of Western science. And I'm also, on the other side, seeing that what has happened is far more profound than that.
Right.
And that what we are doing now is trying to find a way to bring more people along through trying to legitimize our game in society. But the underground process in which psychedelics have continued to be used in the society and have come into mainstream consciousness, that goes on independent of whether we lose or win on the front we're talking about in research. Because it was just in the same way as when we did the Good Friday study of Walter Pankey. We were doing a double-blind placebo study, and all of us realized the absurdity of that. That the question of whether psychedelics was anything or not, for anybody who had taken them, was quite an irrelevant question. And yet, that study was done, and it was a brilliant product of our days at Harvard, I think. I think that Walter refused to take drugs until after he completed the study, so people wouldn't accuse him of what they accused us of sipping our own whiskey. And I want to point out that very recently, Rick here has done a follow-up of Walter Pankey's Good Friday study, and has really gone back and found those people who turned on in Marsh Chapel at Boston University. And what he found was among the experimental group, the people that had psilocybin, long-term persisting effects included enhanced appreciation of life and nature, a deepening sense of joy, a commitment to their vocation, an enhanced appreciation of unusual experiences and emotions, increased tolerance of other religious systems, deepening equanimity in the face of difficult life crises, greater compassion for other peoples, minorities, and nature, increased subsequent participation in civil rights, anti-Vietnam, etc. Timeless eternity and death is not seen as so fearful, therefore they are willing to take more risks. Now that is almost 30 years later of a group of minister students who took psilocybin in Marsh Chapel on Good Friday. And as you recall, of the experimental subjects in the double-blind placebo study, 9 of them had some criteria that would class that as a religious mystical experience. And in the control group, 1 of the 10 had 1 of the 9 criteria. In other words, it's not nothing. If you need it to make sure to understand that. Now, I was asked to talk about what are the benefits of what we did in the 60s and what are our mistakes. Tim didn't deal with what he might have done differently. So, but I can play the straight part, which I've done doing with Tim for years. Here are the things that happened as I can see it from what started in that period. First of all, the culture broke out of the psychotomimetic model of using chemicals. That up until then, in this society, primarily these chemicals were considered psychosis-inducing and under the control of the psychiatric establishment. These chemicals started to be seen, these herbs and plants, started to be seen as sacraments, as they are used in other societies. They were used for creative purposes, and the therapeutic possibilities started to become apparent. The chemicals in the early 60s among the 15 to 25-year-olds became a rite of passage, which was shown in the Woodstock moment. In a culture very sadly lacking in rites of passage, where there is a lot of confusion about shift from childhood to maturity. That period made us clear that it wasn't just the chemical you ingested, but it was the set and setting. And here, of course, the traditions like the American Indian and the shamanic traditions. We knew all that, but we never listened to it. After I started with psychedelics, suddenly books that I had passed on the bookshelf saying, what a bunch of rot, suddenly became the most treasured volumes for me. Books of American Indian law, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, things like that, the Upanishads and the Vedas. In other words, it opened our link to the East and to an incredibly rich philosophical, psychological, and spiritual heritage of humanity that we had primarily been closed to, except for Max Mueller, just a very few things. It really opened us to the East, and I've been living off it ever since. And partly the way it did that was because the chemicals in the psychedelics allowed us to override our habits of thinking. And when we looked around in Western psychology for models about that, they were absent. And when we looked in the East, in things like the Visuddhimagga, there they were, very beautifully articulated. And here were a group of people in the East that we had treated really as, almost as barbarians, that had a wisdom about human consciousness that became, and they became our elders. One of them, of course, became my guru. So it opened us to meditation and spiritual practices. Of course, it became faddish in the 70s, but beyond the fads of gurus and all that, there was a deep process, and there is a deep meditative investment in this society at this moment. Whether you call it stress reduction or whatever you call it, it's there, and it's growing all the time. And that's part of the result of what happened in the 60s. It opened ways for networking because it opened our horizontal power structures rather than our vertical power structures. And that's part of the information age that Tim's talking about now. In a way, it was a precursor of that in allowing us to see vertical institutions as much more ephemeral. And that was the deeper part of the shift that happened then, which I think is the most fundamental shift, which was the shift in our perception of reality. That what happened to us was what I think Einstein did to Newton. It went from treating a reality as absolute to seeing that all realities are relative. And the minute you do that, social institutions are up for grabs. That changes the whole ballgame right there. And that is one of the things that has happened, and that isn't turnable back. And that's part of why there is so much chaos in the moment in the culture, because social institutions which kept the structures going are breaking down because people don't value them. In Boston, when I was growing up, on Sunday you went to church. Now on Sunday you go to the shopping mall. That's a difference in values. Family structures broke down. And we don't have to say values, we just have to look at change. The question is who rides with change and who gets frightened and tries to grab at the old history. And this is a moment when changing from absolute reality to relative reality is a tremendous opportunity for growth, and it has a lot of scariness to it. But that's part of what our work is. That shift of reality started to spread into the world through minstrels like Bob Dylan and like the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead and Rolling Stones and Big Brother and on and on. And it's gotten so far now, I'll tell you how far it's gotten, that if I speak now in the Middle West, which I'll be doing in a few weeks when I'm on tour, if I speak in a relatively medium-sized city, I can look at an audience in which 70 to 80% of the audience has never taken psychedelics, they have never read Eastern literature, they've never been to the East. And I can say exactly the same things I said in 1965 or 70, which then were heard by an audience of a few people between 15 and 25, and that audience is going, yes. The audience in the Midwest is saying, yeah, we hear you. Now, how do they hear us? What happened? How did those values get inculcated into the culture? I think because you can't see it, you don't think it exists. But then when you get these little clues around the edge, you begin to see the profundity of what the social changes that were wrought at that point in the 60s. The Grateful Dead now is a major religious ritual. Our work with the dying. The work started really by Eric Cass and people like that, way back, beautiful men. That has done incredibly in terms of awakening us, bringing death out of the closet. And a lot of the way in which now so many people want to work with the dying comes out of that kind of psychedelic process that happened in the 60s. Okay, I think I should say something about the mistakes. Of the early 60s of our research. In one way, I kind of am with Timothy, what mistakes? It was life, we did the best we could. So I don't say these in some sense of, I don't know what sense I say them in, I'll just say them. When we did that research at Harvard, very shortly after the beginning, we realized that this was a heresy to that social institution. That the Harvard is an institution committed to the intellect and to rational analytic process. And when we brought on something that dealt with intuitive, transcendent, unitive experiences, in which the intellect became a subsystem rather than the metasystem, we were taking on the priest class of the church, and we were doing it within the confines of that church. And what we were doing is going on to a football, and to a tennis court with football cleats. That's the way I would understand it. And I think that once we got going, because we were ingesting our own product, we lost our connection with the community around us. And I feel that this was neither our fault nor their fault. It was one of the results of the profundity of this experience that we couldn't turn away and couldn't turn back. But we did lose our support system, and we didn't slow down enough to keep it with us. Because it finally got to the point of who's taken it and who hasn't. And that bridge became unbridgeable after a while. And it was shocking to us that people we loved and worked with as colleagues no longer were our colleagues. I think we got a little confused about evolution and revolution. And I think we played with the revolutionary aspects of psychedelics, when to me the far more interesting issue are the evolutionary aspects. And I think that had we been more evolved in our wisdom and not feeling we were inventing the wheel all over again, we would have had an appreciation of what the fears were of the society and how to work with those fears rather than just pitting ourselves against them. I don't think the way we did it was the only way it could have been done. I think we were over-enthusiastic about how easy behavior change would be. When I look at many of my friends that I took acid with in the 60s, I see that there's been a lot of work they've done, but there's a lot yet to do. And I remember Tim and I had a chart on the wall of how soon everybody would get enlightened. It involved putting acid in the water supply, but it still will be very soon. We talked about